Good morning. I'm Reverend Liz Morante, and I'm delighted to welcome you myself here to Monterey Center for Spiritual Living. And this is the final week in a talk series. Each month this year, we've been looking at our theme for the whole year, which is being awake. And then each month, we are being awake to some aspect or quality of God, and this month has been being awake to power. And as a way or a lens to look at power, I've been having us try on the notion of being a spiritual warrior. And Pema Chodron, who's a great Buddhist teacher and writer, says that spiritual warriors, and she writes a lot about it because it's a term in Buddhism, that they are warriors of non-aggression. And I really like that. That spiritual warrior, because usually we think rushing in, are warriors of non-aggression who move into situations to, and this is very Buddhist, alleviate suffering. And this goes very well with how I've been talking about spiritual warriors, as the spiritual warrior is being the place where peace, where truth, where compassion shows up. Not running into something to hit somebody over the head, but cultivating that which allows us to be that presence. And that presence of peace, that presence of truth, that presence of love is what allows us to lift the people around us and, in the Buddhist way, alleviate suffering. So that's what we have been looking at this week. And last week, I had us look at a notion that the spiritual warrior aims to do, and that's to welcome challenge. And really, it's about another way I see the spiritual warrior is that challenges, when they come up, the spiritual warrior is on, what do you call those things we used to have, those boards that had a ball at the bottom? Well, like a little mini, not the seesaw that two people sit on, but the one that you stood on. Bongo boards? So you guys know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? The one that you'd go, here's a better, that it's like this, and then you have a kind of a wheel, and so you do your own. And then as I was thinking that and thinking, what the heck are they called? I said, it's like surfing. That you ride the waves. If you've seen successful surfers, not that I've watched a lot of them, they don't, they have to get a balance and a feel and an equanimity, and that allows them to ride through the waves. Well, our lives and the challenges in our lives are like waves. And so being a spiritual warrior isn't about beating down the wave. It's about learning to ride the wave in a positive way that expands us and supports the people around us. I knew you would like that metaphor. So last week, as I said, we looked at welcoming challenges, and this week we're looking at a specific kind of challenge, and that's the challenge of change. Anybody here not experience change? I mean, some people go through life and maybe don't experience what they would call challenges. But I don't think anybody ever says, no, I've had no changes in my life ever. I was like, are you alive? Were you a baby once? So, how are you with change? Do you resist it, as many of us do, or do you welcome it? Or does it depend on whether you initiate the change? Of course, some of us, resist even that, but some of us are happy about change if we resist, if we initiate it. I was doing a workshop years ago at the summer church camp we had up in the Seattle area, and I was doing a workshop. I was talking about change, and this man who had become sort of the CEO of the church. It's a very large center, so he was kind of the head of the administration, and he just said, "I love change." And I looked at him, I said, "Lou, that's because you're usually the one initiating them." And, everybody laughed. He was kind of like, oh yeah. So some of us are very happy to initiate change, but almost all of us, when a change is thrust upon us, we kind of shrink. So I'm going to tell you some facts, really, about change, and then we're going to look at why do we resist change, and then we'll consider some ways and some ideas to move into being better surfers of change. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great transcendentalist, and one of the people that our founder Ernest Holmes so loved, he said reading Emerson was like drinking water, that it slaked his thirst. Emerson said, "It is not in his goals, but in his transitions that man is great." It is not in his goals, it is in his transitions that man is great. And of course, he meant women too. But it is that idea that it is not what we set out to do in life, it is how we navigate the unexpected or the moving into new territory that change and transitions are. And as we indicated earlier, change is inescapable. There is not one of us that will not move into change. Why? Because it's the nature of life. Ever watched nature? Nature changes. Things grow up in the ground, they bloom, then they fall off and die, and then they regenerate, and they come all back together again. That's the way nature is. That's the way our lives are. And Buddhism talks a lot about this because it says that form is fluid, so don't get attached to it. More on that later. And those of us who call ourselves metaphysicians, we also know form, the nature of form. That means anything we see and touch in this three-dimensional world, it changes. Even this is pretty solid and it's been here, but I dare say that it didn't look like this when it was first put in. I'm sure this back didn't look like this when it was first put in. It wears. So the nature of life on this thing called planet Earth that for some reason each of us decided to experience is that the things that we see change. Ernest Holmes, our founder of our philosophy and our teaching, said this: nature will not let us stay in one place for too long. If we did, he said, we would become too rigid, too set in our ways. For some of us, that's already happened. Nature demands change so that we may advance. So just put that in the back of your mind. Nature demands change. We could say life demands change so that we may advance. Another really fact about change is that changes are thresholds. They are always thresholds, and that means that there's something that we step over, something we step over from the old, we step over into the new. And so that means that there are endings, there's a middle place, and then there are beginnings. That is the nature of change itself. And finally, something I want you to consider as we move forward in this talk is an idea that I heard several years ago. Yesterday's solutions are today's problems. Think about that. Do you understand what that means? Yesterday's solutions are today's problems. We can see that on a macro level, that these great industries that create all these things in the world we love, more industry, more jobs, more wonderful things created in the world, they create pollution. So we have to deal now with the pollution that all our industriousness is creating. On a micro level, there are in our lives the things that we go, oh, that works. That's how I'm going to be. That's what I'm going to do. I'm reading a book right now called I Will Find Peace There, and it's by a woman named Margaret Roach. And she used to be she was an executive vice president for Martha Stewart, the Martha Stewart organization, and she'd worked for Martha Stewart for a long time in various things. And she had a summer cabin up in the New York State hinterlands, I think in New York, maybe Massachusetts, New York. And she one day just decides she can't do the corporate thing anymore, so she moves out to her cabin full time. And so this book is about her getting off that corporate hamster wheel and being used to living in this cottage and living in the hinterlands with the seasons and all kinds of things. And the part that I read yesterday, she's realizing, but you know how first we get something in our head, then it really becomes something that we embody. She is starting to make that move because she has things that are challenging in her new life, and of course she's still in the middle of a transition, is that there are things that scare her, and so what she does is start investigating, getting facts. And I'm trying to make this long story short, and she has friends that say, stop being in your head, and she finally gets it in her own self, that intellect that had got her where she was in terms of her corporate career, that dependence on intellect. When stuff's not working in my life, let me go research it. When stuff's not working in my life, let me use my head to solve it. That is no longer working. She needs to move into more of her heart. I know that's something I will reveal to you that when I was in ministerial school, I kept getting that feedback to move more into my heart. Because when I grew up, I was a really smart kid. What I did was grab on that. Maybe you have that experience. I grabbed on that as that's who I was. But life started demanding other things of me. Kind of like, you want to be a minister? Well, guess what? It's not about all being in here. So we find something that we think is a solution. Oh, be smart, or oh, be funny, or oh, be beautiful, or handsome, and rugged and tough and strong. And nature has a way of dealing with some of the latter. So that the things that we cling onto in terms of a solution, and we think this is the way to make my life work, may turn out to be our problem the next day. We have to let it go. So these are some facts about change and about life and change. So I ask you to start thinking about or becoming awake to what in your life are you holding on to that's not serving you as you are moving into whatever stage of your life you're in right now. Perhaps it's your job. Perhaps it's a relationship. Perhaps it's certain behaviors you have that again, have been the thing that got you through, so you tend to rely on that, depend on it. But it keeps you stuck now. I know another one of those, before I move on, another one that a lot of us have, especially in this movement, is, I can do it all by myself. I can do it myself. I'm a survivor. I'm tough. I don't need anybody's help, maybe because we felt like we didn't have it. So as a young person, we learned to be very self-reliant and do everything on our own and got what we wanted in life and felt a sense of security. And then there'll come a time when each of us needs help. Each of us needs to reach out to community for support. And so that Lone Ranger mentality that was so great at certain times has become today's problem. Maybe you know people like that. So again, start thinking about, where is there something that you're clinging on to that really life is trying to move you past? And now let's look at specifically why we resist. You know, if change is natural and normal, and we can see nature and the trees and animals and all that changes, and they live and they die, and that's a way of life. We know that. I don't think anybody in this room doesn't know that, so why do we resist it? Well, I think mostly we resist it because of 3 mistaken ideas we have. And these all relate to what I just said. The first one is that we identify ourselves as our circumstances. Our looks, what we do, our health, where we live, all those physical things we make the mistake of identifying ourselves with. In the book I was telling you about, Margaret keeps saying her eternal question is, who am I if I am not mroach@marthastewart.com? You know, it sounds silly to us, but that had been her identity. She confused that with the truth of who she was. So she keeps bumping up against that. She knew it was time to go, but who am I if I'm not that? Who am I if I'm not the young, beautiful, charming person? Who am I if I'm no longer the great athlete? Who am I if I am no longer a corporate giant? Who am I if I am no longer able to hike 10 miles and not have my feet hurt? You know, who am I? Who am I if I'm not married? Who am I? Who am I if I am married? That we get this idea that this stuff, which we know changes, is somehow the truth of us, and more importantly and more sadly, is what determines our worth, is what determines our value, is what determines, and this may not be in the forefront of our thinking, but what determines our lovableness. So we resist change because it threatens our sense of who we are. We also resist change because, as when I was talking about thresholds, because change always represents the end to something. And what we do in our heads is we think any ending means it's all over. It's all over. It's all over. Anybody had something end in their life? You're all still here. It wasn't over. It's not over. That particular phase of your life, that particular relationship, that particular way of being, that may be over. But it's not the end in a final sense. It's as if our reptilian brain gets activated. And it probably is that our reptilian brain gets activated and says, oh no, that's it. And so, of course, it's like a death. An end is like a little death. But it's not the final one. And finally, and this is tied totally to the other two, why we resist change so much is as human beings, we need certainty. We like to be able to say, we know the way it is. I know the way it is in my life. And when stuff changes, especially changes that are thrust upon us, whether it's an illness, a death, a getting laid off, a firing, then what I know doesn't seem to be true anymore. And so as human beings, anytime we get threatened by some change, because it hits us so deeply, we start running around trying to manipulate, start running around. Maybe we try to affirm our fear away, or go eat, or go drink, or go watch TV. But we do things to avoid the discomfort of knowing that we may not be so sure about stuff. I mean, think about the fights and you've had with people who need to be right. And maybe you're one of them, but we won't go there. I'll just say for you, I certainly have a family legacy of needing to be right. So I'll just own up that for all of you. There can be this stranglehold on being right, because the alternative seems so devastating. Well, if I'm not right, then I must be wrong, and if I'm wrong, what do I know? It seems shaky. And if this idea really hits something in you, that's when you know you want to go really study Buddhism, because that's a whole thing about being comfortable with uncertainty. And that, in fact, that's a big part of the spiritual warrior, but I realized I had other things to say, and if I went off on that, we'd be here for about 3 more days, and I think the salads would kind of get yucky. Which reminds me, the potluck, if you came and didn't know or forgot or whatever, please stay. We always have plenty of food, so please plan on staying. So how do we get through this thing? How do we actually become surfers of change, spiritual warriors riding our bongo boards? Well, I think we have to cultivate something that is actually the hallmark of the Buddhist. And again, we're not Buddhists, but there's so much in Buddhism that can support and inform our life. And maybe some of you are Buddhists. Because we honor all paths to spirit and all paths to truth. And that certainly is one. And it's something that some of you have heard me talk about before, and that is we have to cultivate curiosity. Curiosity is a thing that will help us through this. And let me give you some examples. When we start having that fear and discomfort in change, often for many of us, we don't want to look at it. We just know we're vaguely uncomfortable. And so then we start doing some of those behaviors I talked about, some of those avoidance behaviors. When we have curiosity, then we can start looking at the discomfort and start poking it a little bit. And say, what is this? What is being threatened here? What are my fears? There's part of us that resists looking at our fears, but you know what? We are all so much more powerful than we know. We can look at the things that scare us. We can look at the things that scare us. And when we look at those things, then we don't stop being ineffective them. Things run us as long as we're not willing to look. Our avoidance of looking at them makes us do nutty things in life. You've been there or seen someone, so you know. So the curiosity helps you say, what am I really feeling here? What am I mistakenly thinking is happening, or what am I truly thinking is happening? Because it isn't that I want you to hear me say that endings are not painful, that when we move through some change, that there isn't something that is very appropriate to grieve. In fact, for those of us who don't want to do that part, move too soon into the new, that's not a good thing, because we carry this unexpressed grief. But what I am saying is that we look at our fears and our beliefs, and this is, by the way, is a great thing to work with a practitioner on. If you feel that you are going to look at a belief that the truth of you is now gone because of a change in your life, who you are has been irrevocably changed in a way, not that you will not be the same, but that you are damaged and can never be joyful or never like that again, that's a great time to see a practitioner, because that is not the truth of you. Yes, changes change us. But I'm going to get to that in a minute. So be curious and start asking questions. Start being the detective of your own psyche. Now, another way that we use a curiosity is as we contemplate the new life that is before us, that this change seems to be ushering in, to remember, A, that there is a beginning, we can start being curious about what is that, and also ask some questions. Whether we like what's happening or not. See, and that has nothing to do with it. Whether we, at this stage, like the change or not, as we can look ahead and say, okay, so if this change is happening, then in the midst of this change, what is wanting to happen in me? What is wanting to happen in me? What is waiting to be called forth in me? And what do I want in the midst of this change? And especially for those of us who are in our middle years and beyond, a great question, but a great question anytime that a transition or a big change happens is, what is unlived in me up until now? What is unlived in me that it just may be that this change is calling me to express? Because if we believe, and we have been talking about this, and this is something that supports all of this, if we believe that life is for us, and all the changes in our life, as Ernest Holmes said, are that demand of nature so that we may advance, it doesn't mean bigger, stronger, faster. It means more authentic and awake to our spiritual magnificence. That's what that means. Then the changes, even when we didn't orchestrate them, even when we don't know where the heck they came from, are the divine urge moving us in new directions. And often, and those of us sort of sheepishly know this, that sometimes there's changes that we see them brewing, and of course we resist them because we don't like it, and because of the reasons I talked about. We just pretend it's not happening, pretend it's not happening, pretend it's not happening. And something, that could have unfolded sort of easily and gracefully, then was like, poosh. Anybody done that? I have. Don't raise your hand, but I have. It's because that divine urge is saying, sweetheart, My beloveds, you need to move into this knowing. You need to move into this phase. You need to move into this whatever, greater yet to be. You're greater yet to be. One of my new favorite spiritual writers is a man who I think recently died, sometime in the last 5 years. His name is John O'Donohue. And he's Irish and Catholic, not too surprising. And he's written several books that talk about what is Celtic spirituality, that sort of ancient pre-Christian, but then combined with Christian Catholic spirituality. And this book, To Bless the Space Between Us, is a bunch of blessings for transitions. So this book is all prayers for transitions, being a new mother, retiring, losing someone. So all kinds of stuff. And he says that thresholds need not be a threat. So change need not be a threat. It contains within it an invitation and a promise. An invitation and a promise. An invitation to see something new, usually about ourselves and our possibilities, and often about life, and sometimes about another person. That these thresholds, these changes and transitions, don't have to be a threat. They contain an invitation and a promise. And that promise, that idea of promise, speaks precisely to that human need for security, for certainty. That as long as our sense of certainty is based on anything in the physical world, we will be shaken. We will be shaken off our foundations. Because, as we said in the beginning, forms change. Forms change. Forms change. So, if we have certainty, it can only be on that, the only thing that does not change, which is the presence of God. And as I was thinking about this, I was realizing I wouldn't say our idea of God never changes or our experience of God never changes, because it does. In our book club, we're reading about God and how God seems to change. But as we deepen, as we mature, as also as we go to God for different things, our experience of God will change. Sometimes we have deep, connected experiences and we think it's always going to be like that. And then we can have a dry period where we feel like it's not there. But that presence is always still there. And as long as we depend on that, as we put our sense of certainty on the certainty of God's presence, whether we experience it in the moment or not, then we will see everything that shows up in our life. Whether it's, as we talked about the metaphor last week, the wanted guest or the unwanted guest. Whatever change, the welcome change or the disguised welcome change. That we'll see it as part of God's presence urging us. I want to close with a part of a blessing of John O'Donohue's, which is actually for the traveler, but the metaphor is very apt. A journey can be a sacred thing, especially if we're talking about the journey of our life. Make sure before you go to take the time to bless your going forth. May you travel in an awakened way, gathered wisely into your inner ground, that you may not waste the invitations which wait along the way to transform you. May you travel in an awakened way, gathered wisely into your inner ground, that you may not waste the invitations which wait along the way to transform you. So, let's move inside for a moment. As I claim now for each person here that divine inner ground of spirit, that divine inner ground which is the life of our life, which is the unchanging foundation upon which who we truly are is built, is based. And so knowing that each of us is the ground of the divine, I know that while changes may come and changes will come, changes that seem to threaten our very sense of self, that I know that what changes is only what is no longer needed. And what endures is the truth of who we are. The love of God, the love of the divine, the truth of God, and the peace of God. Our true self simply becomes more and more revealed, and anything unlike it is shed, drops away, so that we may express more life and more of the divine. I am grateful that this is happening right here, right now, for each and every one of us. And that we are supported, and that we are powerful enough to surf the tides of change. And that we are those heart warriors, those spiritual warriors, bringing more peace and more love to the world. I am so very grateful. And I release this word, so it is.